All right, I'll gavel us back in and reshare my screen here. And so next up, public safety and support. A couple big items under this one. I think the start of the heavy lift is on Kylie, if you want to request a review of the Blake Decision and Marysville Ordinance and just a 10,000 foot of what that looks like. And then again, to see if council has the collective will to do anything similar. And then after that, sorry, look at this. Maybe, yeah, I think we can do that and combine it with the third bullet point here. Sorry, I'm not sharing yet. And then maybe we'll go to discussing of funding of basically fire and police team.
Okay. All right, I don't mind splitting my stuff up.
Or we can do that too. So if you want to actually, yeah, let's go on order. Sorry. Yeah, let's go on order.
That first, I think it's confusing for that. So generally familiar with like decisions, the Supreme Court case that criminalized possessory offenses for controlled substances. And we're currently operating under a legislative fix to that decision. And that fix expires July. And so right now the legislature is considering, there's, I think when I looked at AWC on Friday, there were 3 bills that have been. So we don't know what that holds. And so that's really all I wanted to say about the Blake decision. I don't think we need to dive into that. If you have personal interest in learning more, there are a lot of resources out there. There's some fact sheets for ACLU, Washington Association, the Association of Attorneys, and MRSC. So if you want to know more about that, nuances of it, I'm happy to talk to you in connection with some resources. But for the purposes of maybe considering legislation, I think the important thing to know is that existing legislation, state legislation, is set to expire this year, and the legislature is currently considering several bills to replace what we're doing now, which right now is essentially and the police chief can talk a little bit about how the current fix is going. It involves referrals for service, 2 referrals for service. There is a citation for criminal charge. I don't believe that there are very many people being charged. There were some, I guess, procedural hurdles to get to that point where you know it's the same person who's been offered services. And so, in effect, the possession of controlled substance is generally not an enforcement priority or frankly even a possibility. So, Marysville enacted an ordinance in December. They got some attention in the media, and it was put on the agenda for discussion. We reached out to them about their ordinance as well as their agenda materials that their council considered. And what their ordinance does is it criminalizes, without the need for the referral for services, the use of controlled substances in public. That's in line with alcohol and marijuana, which does have a criminal prohibition on use in public, but other controlled substances don't currently have that prohibition. So that's unusual, I think about it. So they enacted that and they made it a gross misdemeanor out of a date. Those were, if the council did something similar, it's going to have an impact. address. And so it would have, you know, obviously a police impact and prosecution impact. And then I think my concern and what I would share with you is that at present, that is not preempted. Does everyone know what preempted is? It means that the state law, in some areas, trumps or goes up in place of a local regulation. So right now, this isn't, but it could be if the state law, for example, says that the use of controlled substance in public, a simple misdemeanor instead of a gross misdemeanor, and it's directly on point, then that would be preempted. It could be something similar to a felony. And if they didn't touch it at all, then we would still be okay. So if we took it, action like Marysville, you know, they did it at the end of December. By the time we did our analysis of what we need to consider for implement, you know, how it would impact them and the police and all that, I would say it's going to be, yeah, I think it's like March before something could be, you know, like on the ground. I haven't talked to their analysis, but just when you make a new law, right, and you got to figure out. So the risk would be that we do that and then it's undone the next month.
So I'm hearing that if there was collective will to explore this and work on it, we could put it on the list, but it would be something we really want to schedule for later in the year once the legislature shakes out.
I'm just saying that's a consideration that, like, if you have it, the state legislature is currently looking at controlled substance issues, right? And we don't know what's going to be at the end of the day, that if use in public is going to be included in a final bill, or if it's not, and if it is, there's a chance that we could be free.
So let's go and then keeping an eye on time. Any questions about that ordinance? And then I'd like to hear if there is support or opposition for doing that. It's something to consider. And so then Denise, so okay. Denise, no.
I just have a question for Chief Wolfe. Is this a direction that your department would sees a potential really positive impact on our community? If we were to pass an ordinance that tightens up on active drug use in public places, what is your assessment of the impact to our community?
The high level impact, it would be huge. The idea was that I think the theory was that we would, by not criminalizing drugs, we would have a lot of people have a better chance to get off of it. That hasn't panned out. Our navigators did 558 contacts last year, and of all those contacts, I had one person who said that. I sat with a young man named Jacob, needle in his arm, talked to him, himself, my bike partner that day for an hour. Now, dude, you're gonna die. And he's had 2 friends die from fentanyl, and he still was like, yeah, I'm just not ready to go get help. There has to be some sort of accountability to help people. I think our therapeutic courts, drug courts, judge on board with that. It's not about again, but you got to have something held over their head to give them. To leave them on the street doing drugs, they're going to die. And we're seeing a lot of overdoses at a level we've never seen before. We're seeing a lot of deaths. So we need to do something different. And then on just a practical level, homeowners and business people are losing their money. These people openly doing drugs, please do nothing about it. We do our best to explain to them that we didn't do it.
Pleased to meet you. 2 things on this. It's the enormous majority of everybody I talk to who's a member of the public feels that this Marysville ordinance or something like it is just a ticket. It's, it just breaks people's hearts to see people literally killing themselves, you know, on the streets while we obviously new people, and all of us, well, we can do nothing. But at the same time, was somebody puts up mental health, and please correct me if my facts are wrong. At Project Connect, and it's like, there's no beds. Like, once people get referred, where are they gonna go? So that's that's a part of the puzzle that I think we really have to work on.
Yeah, definitely.
That's it.
No, it's a, yeah. Spend the whole week discussing, yeah, that is not, but great point. Quinn, I see a hand, your thoughts, and then Eric.
Sure. Yeah, my husband first out of law school, prosecuted in Seattle and did a diversion program for drug court. And that was interesting to see from a perspective, because it was a lot of the times the only time that folks were seeking out help. And we were at the 20 under 40 a few nights ago. There was, I forget the gentleman's name. She owns a hair salon. There we go. Amazing. Doesn't surprise me. And her story was really inspiring and fascinating. And it started with her saying the first time she was, and I hope I'm not misquoting, but the first time that she was sober as a young person was when she entered, you know, the criminal justice system. And that kind of prompted some things. I think I would be really hesitant if we had different folks on the bench that might, you know, throw the book at these people and do the traditional aspect of let's just hide these people away. But I think with the personnel we have right now, this is one more tool that we have to incentivize folks to get help with it.
Eric?
So I don't know if anyone else had this as a topic, but I know I sent this in my email. That's one thing for us to discuss. And I watched I think it was on Como, when I hit on the news, and in particular, just listening to the police officer. No, I'm planning to talk about the toolbox. It doesn't necessarily need to be used, but this police officer explained the frustration that people, I think, hit upon it. And I really want to give our police officers the tools that they need. So this police officer said before the Marysville Ordinance, if he saw someone in a car shooting up, all he could do was say, "Hey, man, you should probably stop this." And if you follow, there's supposed to be a database, or you're supposed to give them 2 free passes. That don't work. There's no database. There's no nothing. It's just extremely sloppy, in my opinion, what the state has done. But he said, this gives me an option to say, by the way, I'm going to arrest you for drug possession, or you can go get help, your choice. But he's trying to save the life. Because I think we all know, yeah, we've got a drug problem. What makes it even worse is a lot of these drugs are laced with fentanyl. And these people, not only, I mean, they're not in the right frame of mind. So, and as Quinn had just stated, I feel confident that we're not going to have a judge throw the book at him. If there's not a program, you throw the idea about, well, there's no programs where it can go. Fine, but I think Judge Floyd could actually okay, there's no program, there's no fine, no whatever, and whatever. So it's not like, okay, no program, go to jail, in my opinion. I'll let the judge talk about that. But I think as a community, and we get the emails about stuff that's going on, I don't want to wait for the legislature. I want to send a message to the legislature saying, by the way, I know you're thinking about this. Marysville did this. This is our one example. Hey, Bremerton just did it too. Now I want you to go ahead and craft that legislation that applies statewide. So I'd like to get this done sooner rather than later.
So I think I'm hearing pretty broad support for at least adding an item of, we can get the exact language later, but consider drafting, we'll get the right, draft to consider a Marysville life ordinance.
Marvel. That,
I would definitely not be in support of it.
okay,
Yeah, absolutely not.
okay. Just
Who
wanted
do
to
we
bring that up.
see that's generally shooting up? Who do we see? Unsheltered folks. Do we know that there's backlog in our court system? We know that there's a backlog. in the court system. Do we know that there's no beds available for folks who are seeking substance use disorder treatment? We know that there's no beds. So why create, this is almost like creating an unfunded mandate because we don't have the resources other than to criminalize unsheltered individuals.
Their behavior.
So this is a good example of, for this afternoon of, you may rank it as 0 or a 1 because, you know, someone else may rank it as that. And that's been, you know, like that's fantastic to have disagreements and that may end up not the top priority if we don't have unanimous on it. For a majority, but that's, yeah, and that's why I want to keep moving on time. So this specifically, that's why I'm gonna get as an item, but yes. That's all good. Most of the focus, you're good. If you have some quick thoughts on this, yeah, please.
Yeah, so, our court administrator does have some information to share about availability of services and about how this ties into our therapeutic courts. But just overall, keep in mind, folks can't get to therapeutic court unless this is your chain right here.
Yeah.
Arrest, prosecution, court. And so they can't get to court, therapeutic court, without the ordinance that allows the police to enforce it, that allows us to file the charges, that allows the judge to have the case. And then, so just putting that out there, and then they can speak as to the availability of services, because that's what.
Which will be a part of my presentation.
Okay.
It's my turn to speak.
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
No, I think, I'll tell you, I'll leave this on there as a draft to consider. And that does not mean that we have agreed right now that we're gonna enact it. It's, if it's a higher priority, then we can say, yes, please draft it so we can have a full study session on debating the merits and changes, having those in-depth conversations. Yeah.
What I'll just say is that the therapeutic courts that have been approved by our state legislators for funding into the programming for that, we now have in Bremerton. We do have our first participant, possibly 2, next 2. So we have that set up for Tuesday. There are services available. There's funding available right now for this program. There's no guarantee of how long that funding will be available, but I believe that the City-Council is committed to that program, as well as the current state legislature.
Gotcha. And that's so, okay, perfect. So with that, and because I know I'm okay, keep an eye on the clock. Let's move on to funding of emergency services, and I think
and
Director Pat, jump in with you. I think you got a proposal to kind of throw at us, and again, the eye of if we agree, hey, investigate X, Y, and Z to get more money for folks.
Well, I think council knows that both police and fire are kind of running full volume. And slack, staff or staffing not being able to keep up with the services that are being requested and looking out into the future. I think we need more people. Which you need more services, not just from this. So between myself, the mayor, chief, legal, and finance, trying to figure out a way to be able to put a long-term funding source in place. I mean, fire department has the ability to get one federal grant, safer grant, but they're only 3-year grants. And then we operated on one, but then we have to come up with a funding source to be able to firefighters. Law enforcement right now doesn't necessarily have those type. Is it coming? Maybe because of some issue. So anyways, doing research, really the only thing that we can do is a property tax increase. Right now, our property tax is pretty low, for $1.47 per thousand. To fund about 17 positions between police and fire would be about 40 cents per thousand increase. For the citizens, it would be about $10 a month on a $3,000 house. be able to do it, but it has to go to the public. So it has to go to voters. The challenge police and fire are on is the length of time it takes to get somebody up and running. We're 6 to 9 months, law enforcement about a year. So even if city council came down and said, hire people. Right? Well, that process, just to get them in the door is a couple months. And then down the road. So we're really looking at use that hire people. We're not going to see any benefit until 2024. So the longer we kick the can down the road, longer it's going to take to get where we need to be. And I'm going to tell you, honestly, I know all our departments have issues, but we're behind the 8 ball starting now. I mean, we're getting overwhelmed on both sides of public safety. So that's kind of the $30,000.
Perfect. And so I think the proposed action to council, looking at Mike, is to support this going out to the voters, or to what's the action council?
Yeah, we got some thorough work to do to the administration, but that would be the are you interested in going that route? Maybe something else for us to put a package together in front of you. I think the chiefs and internally we're looking at timeframe.
So if we're going to go,
The time frame of what?
That if we were going to do a vote, it'd be looking at the August, this fall's August ballot, correct?
yes. So I mean, looking at what's proposed to be on the general election for this year, I want to stay away from that. So we would like to run, if we can, in August, which would be in the primary, which spreads the cost out because the primaries that they're with everybody else. South Kitsap's going to be running their levy again, so we can tie into a public safety message kind of throughout the county. But we have to have everything to the county by May 12th.
Wow.
I will.
Yes.
Yes.
So it would be a necessity to be out ahead.
To get that quick and for us to say as a nod.
Yeah.
Yes, okay. So, did you have questions?
Yeah, I just want to make sure I understand. So you want, is it a bundle for all services, or, or is it, would it be 2 different?
It's one.
It's
one just property tax.
And so it would be an increase of $10 a month, the average property tax owner, for a bundle, increase to hire 17 new FTEs.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So Denise's hand and on.
So these would be, firefighter positions, just on your side, firefighter positions and some, EMT positions.
Also,
Okay.
So some of these positions, 5 of these positions asking for our firefighter paramedics, and then the others are firefighters. And then 1 administrative assistant is currently, I have 1 administrative assistant. She's technically, this is the fire chief, and she's having to support training our money's office. So we've had that position, we just haven't had it back in a lot of years. So that's 1. And then 8.
Thank you, Chief. So, Chief Wolfe, you have 8 positions. Would they all be the same type of? Just,
Well, by the time we caught up, just to give you a reference, our comp plan calls for per 1,000. That would put us today. So when we say we're behind, we're way behind. We're operating at 1.4, and that's 64 officers. We currently have 59 hired. Our turnaround for a brand new hire is no longer a year; it's closer to a year and a half to get them operational. And looking into the future as we grow and watching how we're growing, still, but it's Orchard, Skia is growing, the housing project is going in everywhere. The things that we do with 8 officers today, think we would end up creating this another district for us to service to give the best service possible, and those lead officers would get up door like these to full functions now. As far as trying to, ultimately, what we'd like to do is grow our protective division so we can focus on property crimes. We'd like to bolster our traffic units, and that's our number one complaint, you guys probably hear from all your constituents.
Yes.
I have 2 traffic officers dedicated, we'd love to go. There's a lot of things, there's many things. We talked about our business district, well, I'd like to have more than a couple bike patrols just downtown, on the east side, down on Cal, on the west side. Probably one of our most effective tools. So yeah, we are, if we get to 64K, which is projected, that's 115 officers at 1.8, 89 officers at 1.4. So we need a discussion on how do we grow and how do we move forward.
And as the city grew and property tax revenue increased, then to allow more continued support long term to more positions could be created as this revenue source grows in total dollars. Is that would be the thought? Yeah.
Well, so we all understand property tax, but I'll use the EMS levy as an example, right? So we run the EMS levy, and it's a levy that expires after 6 years to support the EMS portion. But it never stays at 50% because you have an increase in the city, and we can only collect 1% more. So eventually down the road, you're going to have to look at just renewing this 40 cents or whatever it is 5 or 6 years down the road, just because it's not going to keep up with inflation or the AP. Gotcha. So there is a to be able to.
Okay. So let me do interest of time, just a quick show of hands from council. If you're good with throwing this specific item of stuff, supporting the development of the ballot initiative for this property tax increase for emergency services to the afternoon to rank, and just general.
I'd like to just ask one question.
Yeah. Yeah, let's do that and move to the next one. Oh, I got it. That's written down.
Are there any positions here? I'm truly asking. So are there any positions of like mental health counselors, behavior interventionists, or auxiliary police who can give, speeding tickets? Are there any positions that could be filled by people who have not received a full 18-month training for full police officer? Are there any positions that could be less than that?
The simple answer is
Okay.
the liability of having
All right.
people that aren't trained. Our job's gotten more and more complicated, and it takes longer and more resources to deal with issues. It's not a bad thing, but it's the reality of it. It takes 4 officers an hour to do something. But we're having good outcomes and that's the end. So let's have good outcomes. So
Yeah.
So I think that's a perfect segue to the last 2 topics under public safety. No, like that. No, good. Yeah, not very good. So yeah, these last 2 topics, I mean, we've been hearing all year from folks in the community, and I do look at past council goals, and homelessness has never been on there, something to address and what to do. So multiple people submitted this topic to talk about. Kylie, I think you had some thoughts to share briefing on just kind of what the current legal landscape looks like, and then yeah, I can open it up to specific actions council can take over next year.
Sure. And this is just my own. I know we use the term homelessness on our agenda. I've also started seeing the term homelessness, and I'm curious if just while we're talking about that, like unsheltered, like what is the unhoused, like what is the term that?
I think unsheltered is an even better one.
Okay.
Right now, homelessness is identified you know, where, when you go for grants and work with the state, homelessness is now, is still the term.
The day that the state is using.
Recognize
I was
this
just
and-
curious, I think words matter, I didn't want to, I just was wondering where we were on that. Yeah, and I'm happy to, I think Unsheltered is just really.
Sure.
So, now that we have talked about words. So the legal landscape, a lot of, are, I guess, what shapes the legal landscape in this area of our operations is the Ninth Circuit, and we are in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal. And this is just a little law lesson, I'll give you guys. So the federal system is different than the state system. So we are in the Ninth Circuit, and we are in for federal court, and we're in the second district for state court. The difference is at the state court level, when Division 3 comes out with a ruling, that actually applies to us, even though they're in Spokane. And same thing for just District 1, if that's in Seattle. And so at the state court level, appellate courts it's one court of appeals that applies, rulings apply to all the states. So at the federal level, it is not that way. So if the federal appellate court in like Houston or DC makes a ruling, that doesn't necessarily apply here, and it can certainly be in contrast to a decision made by the Ninth Circuit. Those discrepancies between federal circuit courts exist, and so you will see things that are illegal in California and Washington are not illegal in, you know, other parts of the country, and that's important to understand because all of us travel, and so you also, you know, most people consume media on a national, you know, you hear about news stories or Tennessee's doing this, or you know, Orlando passed this ordinance, and it's important to understand that at the federal level, the United States does not have consistent laws. Well, it's just how it is, and the only way that those inconsistencies get rectified is if the Supreme Court accepts review of a case, and then they set the law of the land. And so we are in the Ninth Circuit, and there have been two cases that have shaped the law in this area regarding municipalities and unsheltered. The first was out of Boise, and they're in the Ninth Circuit, and it involved the city's enforcement of their no camping against their no camping. And the Ninth Circuit held that the enforcement of those ordinances violated the Fifth Amendment, prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment, because it punished the person's state of being. It was not a state in which they had control, and so making essentially their existence a criminal offense. They had nowhere to be. Was cruel and unusual punishment. And then in September, so that was a real shift in the legal landscape for ordinances like that that happened several years ago. In September, a case out of Oregon, the city of Grants Pass, also in the Ninth Circuit, made that ruling applicable on a class basis. And while if you look at the MRSC articles and things, it didn't actually affect really that it didn't change Boise the Boise decisions that much as far as implementation, but it certainly made the cities have more risk exposure. So what was happening before is that, you know, John Doe cited and prosecuted for camping violation would have a cause of action against a municipality for that enforcement action against them under the Eighth Amendment. And now, in grants past, it was an organization that filed on behalf of all homeless people in that particular area. And did so on a class basis, which means that rather than it being like one case, it's like potentially thou. And so those are the two cases I think that have really shaped the legal landscape of enforcing. And like I said, I think it's important to understand that when you are hearing about how other places are addressing issues, I heard that Tennessee just made it a felony. That this is not an area in which there's uniform, law in the United States. So this is also an area in which, so cities in the Ninth Circuit face risk exposure violations of this precedent. Something our poll last year had an audit topic. Do you guys remember when we talked about WCIA every year does a deep dive in one area of city operations, and last year we chose police liability issues, and they reviewed all of our policies, and it was an option to have also, like I said, you could have also chosen, and I don't know the audit or unsheltered side. I don't know what the options are going to be this year, but it's very possible because of also the release that came out in September that a review of policies and practices is going to be an audit topic for this year. So we'll have to do that later. But so what that means is that, so when you look at the decisions, is that because it focuses on Eighth Amendment and essentially what the person doesn't have a choice in the matter, right? There's nowhere else for them to be. The case law essentially makes it a prohibition on enforcing those ordinances if there's not adequate shelter space available for that person. With the added lens that needs to be secular in the sense that it doesn't require participation in religious services to attain the shelter. So WCIA has been working with the city on developing policies that comply with these court rulings, and this is one of those areas that impacts across city departments. There's really not like a department within the city that, for lack of a better word, is the lead on this. Because we can tell obviously that there's an enforcement aspect and police, parks, public works for right of way, courts if there is enforcement, prosecution if it's criminal enforcement. And so and WCA has been, like I said, working with us on drafting a couple of things. One is an ordinance. We currently have an offending ordinance, and in the wake of the decisions in Boise, the effort has been to not enforce that unless there was adequate shelter available. But it's certainly been the trend. If there's also a separate policy on just how we're going to clean up events when they are located. There was a very large one, actually, but helpful for Jeff to weigh in on some of this too, is that one of the challenges is that the cleanup for an encampment, even if it is an abandoned encampment, it exceeds the sometimes the training and what can be done safely by our parks employees because of the issues involved with waste and sometimes hazardous chemicals. So we're working on, we have very, very far along drafts that WCA is working with us to make sure that when we encounter those situations, that city staff are taking measuring steps that are, you know, it's a policy document. If there are people there that there's posting to let them know the city is going to be taking enforcement action there, that there's resources available. And so those are things that we've been working on to make sure that they're in compliance with the law, and that, you know, we're doing what we're supposed to do. So getting to like what ordinances on this issue look like. There's a couple of things. One, most cities are drafting an ordinance in which some places are just not okay for people, period. An example of this would be our watershed. That has always been enforced for no one doing that, right? And so it just as or a unsheltered person and you're camping there, you're just as much of a trespasser as if you are a family going for a hike, and you're similarly not allowed to be there, right? And so those are areas, like that's an example. Most cities are carving out that area. I know Spokane, the riverfront is one that is just off limits. A lot of shoreline is being made off limits all the time because the environmental impacts, you know, are such that it's just not, you know, there's just not a place, right? Other places have made their improved park areas off limits. So situations where a person has sought shelter in a dugout and at a baseball field, and that is not okay, even if shelter space is not available because it interrupts like the little league things that might plan, or you know, at the play field, or you know, on a golf course, right? And so those kind of restrictions on things that are always off limits, I think are still are do not trip them into violation. But when you start making those lists, it is, you can't get to the point where you say it can't be anywhere, right? And there are a lot of considerations, right? You get into there's you know, roadways, bad idea, right? You know, that's not safe for anybody. Sidewalks can create situations as well if people are forced to go into the street because the sidewalk is blocked. So then you get into you know, what is okay, like what is kind of like top tier enforcement, and what is not enforced if there is no shelter space available. And so like crafting that kind of thing, it's a community by community decision. Tacoma has made it to where they say that within a zone around certain facilities like our Salvation Army, that is not a zone in which encampments can exist. And they stated their basis for that as being that they had experienced people who were accessing like the services at those places sometimes being victims of crime of people who, so that those people were vulnerable. And that if they have to walk through an encampment basically to get to the services. I think it also, you know, like I said, there's like community discussion. And so the way that enforcement looks like is that you say in the code that, you know, camping is in public places is generally prohibited, right? However, it won't be enforced if there is not shelter space available. except in the following areas in which it's never allowed regardless. And so that's kind of the setup of how cities are drafting ordinances to maintain public access to public spaces, but balance the reality that there's not shelter space available for everyone. And that's kind of where we are.
So I'm hearing the action item, it's, refine and update our ordinance on prohibition of camping in public. If that's something we want to revisit this year.
I have to say, you kind of have to. So
Yeah,
you
okay.
can make it, you can.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be, yeah. Yeah, the discussion of exactly what areas, what, yeah, that would be down the road, but that would be going to study
Yeah,
session.
and so
start talking.
my,
Okay.
the one part of this where I was struggling in the mayor, struggling in this is a tough one because, it's a, there's public safety, if this could go into. It could go into public works committee because of the impact right of way, I mean, you can have site.
We can figure that out.
You could also
Yeah.
have issues with.
Yeah.
So, or is this the council as a whole, that we just deal with it at study sessions? And until we get it right.
For all these,
So-
but yeah, I'm sure we can coordinate on how best to.
I can say right now, whole council. You know, just our experience in the process, that could.
And then logistics wise, I told them we're running late, that's my fault. 12:15 for lunch, and what I propose is we finish this topic up at 12:15, hard stop for lunch. And then the court takes over the presentation, at the start after lunch, and I think we have enough time buffer where, that'd be great, and then we can get to the fire station, so.
I don't know.
So, yeah, clarify any questions on that, and as well, I know there was discussion though, because it goes hand in hand of not only updating the ordinance, but creation of kind of what can the city do on that side to help coordinate resources? And the create wouldn't happen this year, but the creation or investigating the creation of health and human resources in the city, similar to the county, was an idea. So let's put that.
Just a quick question,
Yeah.
I'm not trying to usurp you. By your hand, and everybody can say no, but I mean, sometimes there's lunch presentations. Is that a bad idea? Okay, it's not a bad idea, presentation. Okay.
Yeah, if they wanted, I think we could, we'd have to keep recording it, right?
So, never mind.
Yeah.
We can.
Okay, no, you have to
we
ask
can-
something.
Topics too, I'm open to that if you wanted to continue that, we don't have to.
Oh, yeah, we're not really set up there for to continue the public meeting, public open. Meeting.
Oh.
I think we have it by the issue. Yeah. Okay, sorry, give me a second.
I just have a question. Are we involving service providers in this discussion, like Cashapp Community Resources or Cashapp Mental Health? I mean, the people that really are on the ground trying to provide services might be good to have representation.
I will say that we are before that, right? I'm just the lawyer, right? So, I'm just telling you.
Well,
what
you're the lawyer.
The lawyer, right? No, I'm telling you what the legal landscape is and like what other cities are doing as far as these enforcement efforts. It's gonna come to you, like, the ordinance and all of the partners and all of that stuff is going to come through the process that you guys do. I'm just telling you that we have
to do that.
we need to do
Yeah.
that.
Okay, so not all, I got it as an item for rank. Yeah,
Say that.
perfect. Well, so let's-
Anybody disagree?
yeah, perfect. No, but thank you so much for the background. That really helps. And part of it is also just getting knowledge. And so then if I move to the specific request to explore the creation of Health and Human Resources Department. I don't know if anyone wants to, we talked about that briefly, Jennifer, I think you had some thoughts.
Okay.
Yeah,
Sure, so this was something that I think Chief Wolfe might have mentioned that would help alleviate some of the things they go through, not to mention this. Helps with some of the risks maybe of this legal landscape we're in, is to have Health and Human Services Department. What are your thoughts on that?
So my pitch is, as we all know, law enforcement for the last 100 years has done this. In the last couple of years in the United States and especially Washington, our legislature said, no, do this. I don't disagree. But the reality is, no one is doing this. We're still the only ones going. If the only solution to homeless problems in the city of Bremerton are the police, I think we all agree we don't have a solution. It's a mess. And we shouldn't be You know, it's not against a lot of people. What the police department gets is we get this push me pull me, for as many people are very passionate about, don't you go near them, leave the homeless one. I have just as many people of my neighborhood is a mess, my business is a mess, why aren't you doing so? And then to make it even more fun, about every couple of months, we change the laws. And I have officers that are just like, what do you want us to do? I don't know. And some days the answer is give us a week while we sort this out. Because we don't want them in trouble, we don't want the city in trouble. And the bottom line is, I think we all want to help people. I think the other thing too is to be honest about, we have homeless population. And within that population, you got about 10% of them that are criminals. And they prey on most vulnerable people. You have to have law enforcement, you have to have order, you have to have people held accountable. So to have we have all these social services, and what I find is the police department, we end up being the hub, and we're pulling Salvation Army, we're pulling the mission, pulling KCR, we're pulling all these people in. That's not where we should be. We need someone, and we have all these outside, we have religious people, we have other groups.
So many communities.
So many people. I'm sitting here today, she knows that helps people all the time. But we have no coordination. We have people overlapping each other, stepping on, and sometimes causing more problems than they think they're helping and they're actually not. If we had a coordinated effort, and started looking at our, pooling all the resources. In some cases, I think we would have that, but we need someone, not law enforcement at the center of that. We need someone for human resources. Is that?
I mean, yeah. You know, like, this is not, and then, you know, all experience it, you're like, this is not what we're trained to do. Somebody else is better trained than us, but we're using the tools at our disposal. And the tools at your disposal are citation. I mean, you know, the tools that you have are the tools that the only ones that you have at your disposal. And I would love for us to explore what funding would look like for a health and services department within the city for future time to alleviate this, because it's not going to get. I mean, and just throw this out there too. I mean, if there's risks involved with the homeless Ninth Circuit case, there's also risks on the other side of ADA non-compliance. So which lobby group is going to win on litigation? They're both, you know, people are camped out on sidewalks. And so there's all kinds of things, and if we had, and it also bothers me that only one person out of 558, like I said, 558 has accepted help from your navigator program in the past for drugs and alcohol, right? I mean, if we had, it sounds like there's a better option available, and I would love to explore what other municipalities are doing for the services department.
We can certainly do that and be your, explore and put all the options out there for future funding. So I've got explore creation of a health and human resources coordinator. I'm not sure that's the exact right funding for. Denise.
Just a quick point that I'd like to see, that we're utilizing current services in the best way possible before we would make a major move into that. And my background in domestic violence said, don't duplicate. It said bring services together. So maybe a public property co-location of services. I don't know, but the thought of setting up a new city department makes me cringe. Not saying it's not needed. So if there's enough analysis, looking out, maybe, but the navigator position, I think, is really exciting. What could be to enhance that role and with more, I don't know, but centralizing within a city, I think would create a whole new layer of bureaucracy that I would personally like to avoid.
One of the things, Jeff, we had a jump start on you on this one, is I think we're talking about one person. Because all the services are out there.
And that was my miswording.
They're not communicating. And that's why it's such a mess. And
We're all silent.
Mhm.
Saturdays.
Launch Quinn.
Yeah, I was just gonna push back a little bit. One principle of BEI work and community organizing and then kind of taking away white supremacy culture is listening to those who are most affected and like what the legislature has kind of done with policing, like the most affected are the police department. So I think we should give great weight to what Chief Wolfe is saying, what his officers are seeing. With the defunding the police movement, like, yeah, there's this entire gap. Where are we putting that funding? How are we getting those services? We can't make the police do all of this. So I'm interested in.
Okay, cool, I've got that as an action item to rank, but it sounds like we got a good consensus. Yeah, I know we're hitting lunch, so the last 5 minutes of the digital extra,